Every week, every week we meet, which is every week, but the last Sunday of every month, our discussion group gets an announcement in the prior days to the discussion with some commentary and things to focus their thinking. And it occurred to me that that information might be worthy of other ears beyond the scope of the actual discussion, so that there is a little bit of a notice as to the focus or the potential focus of the discussion, which often does not follow the lines of what's said, but is often a seed of thought given people for the ideas that may come of it, whether they seem directly related to the announcement itself or not. And those announcements generally go out with a quote from someone somewhere that somewhat references what we're talking about, and then some commentary, written commentary, which I'm going to both read but sort of ad lib too at the same time today. So I thought offering that might be a little bit of a precursor to the Sunday discussion, so that as you're listening to it within a context of something you've had a chance to contemplate, not just as a result of the discussion, but some of the directed commentary, aside from the direction of the commentary that I tend to offer during the discussion. So that's what this is. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, but certainly intro to the discussion itself with the date might be adequate and telling enough. So today the quote is from Arthur Schopenhauer, who's a very notable German philosopher, born in 1788 and died in 1860. So a couple hundred years ago, and had enough time to, almost a couple of years, 100 years ago in his death, but he obviously had enough time to think about things, and also indicates that this problem that we're talking about is a human problem, historic problem. That isn't something that's new. And his quote is, and it came from John P. in Houston this week: "Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world." Very interesting observation almost 200 years ago. To see that the limits of my thinking could be used to define the entire world, rather than recognize the world seemed to be pretty well defined before I started thinking. And maybe there's more to it than just my thoughts. So the commentary today along these lines, and by the way, if you'd like to get an email, you can always go to the information link, contact@mentalobsession.com, send us your email and we'll add you to it. And you're welcome to actually participate in the weekly discussion if you'd like. Even if you're just listening, you can hear it live, and then it's taped and uploaded later on in the day. So what we talk about is a historic human struggle in our discussion. It's not new in the old sense, while it is new every moment we decide to continue, because it's our choices that instigate the causes we create, the causes we choose, that instigate the effects that we suffer and or appreciate. Mentally obsessive thinking is caused by thinking that what is thought to be true is true and real. It's a big leap when we simply have a thought. When this line of thought is relied on, it is inevitable who we think we are, what we think we are, where we think we are, when we think we are, and why we are, can be and is dependent only on thought. Once we think we're only what we think, subsequent thoughts on how to escape only help secure the insecurity and the instability we think we can be hell-bent on escaping. So we're creating a condition that is uncomfortable and disturbing, and then thinking from that thinking that we'll use more thinking to get away from it. So we're working on feeling better about what's wrong. It's not wrong to do this, since it's simply a choice. What's wrong is thinking it's the only choice, the only thing we can do, since it is the only thing we think can be done, because within the confines of this repetition of thinking, it's only thinking of itself. It's thinking of a self born of thought, centered in thought. And that tends to be who we think we are, which is often why we don't feel we belong where we are, because there's always someplace else that seems to be fulfilling us when in fact it's the lack of substance in the thinking we're doing where we are that's giving us that impression. So when we're fighting to constantly feel better about what we're doing that's wrong is exactly how addiction works. And how addiction works is that it always fails. So its working model is failure. Why? Because it's treating the symptom, not the cause. When wrong is fought, it continues. If I go to the doctor and he says, you've got stage 4 cancer, and I say, well, I'm going to come back in 2 years ago and see how your assessment holds up. Chances are, if I came back and even have the possibility of coming back, I would not be well enough to actually arrive. We do it in thought, thinking we're not doing it, because thought is capable of thinking it isn't even doing what we're doing with it. We're capable of thinking what we're doing with thoughts can be hidden by greater motives, greater claims. When wrong is recognized as a signal and an alarm, the value of its purpose is perspective. We actually are given perspective by these effects. When we feel wrong, we feel bad, we feel there's no hope, is to honestly feel what is wrong. There is no hope in trying to get better at doing what's worse. None. To think getting away from or over the discomfort of hopelessness is how feeling helpless sets in, because there's no hope in it. To have hope and faith and belief in something that will never work is, in fact, insanity. The longer we resist recognizing what's actually happening for the sake of what we think is happening, the longer and deeper the impact of feeling disturbed, diminished, and depressed will continue. It's a choice. If we feel the disturbance and think it's something to get away from, we're not taking advantage in the present, where things always happen, of what's happening. So we're not taking the information accurately, and we're not reading it. It's a domestic body language that's being spoken to us clearly, and we're listening to it from obsessive thoughts. And just like listening to other people, when we're thinking obsessively, we think we hear what they're saying when we're only hearing what we think. And we're only thinking we see what we think in the world when we're thinking obsessive thoughts. That's why a lot of people say, you never listen to me. At least in my life, a lot of people have said that. I've had enough obsessive thoughts I've relied on to make believe what they were saying is what I wanted to hear, because I was afraid to actually listen to what they were saying and give them the value in the exact same way that I try not to give those effects any credence when I'm obsessively thinking what I need to do is get away from them, because that's always what obsessive thoughts are going to do. Try to feel better about what's worse. Try to overcome what's worse. Try to get around it. And what's interesting about that is that it proves how flexible thoughts are. And to think the thought underlying the problem is inflexible is to lie again about that problem. It's not true. Those thoughts are as flexible as the thoughts that we can use on the surface in our what we call our consciousness, which is just what we think we're thinking. Those same thoughts can be used to actually minimize the impact of those. We can overcome them with positive thoughts and running and working out and eating better and noticing that the anger that comes up and not acting on it as quickly, so we're not quite as embarrassed and have more shame and guilt to walk around. All those things can be done. They're all modifications and manipulations of the thoughts we're doing, and they're all possible, and they all are very often exactly and only what we've learned to do. They're not wrong to do that. It just shows that the actual thoughts are very flexible, like yogic. So self-centered thoughts are thoughts that think all things are only what is thought of them. Means that they have no other life, no other existence, no other basis. And what would that mean? That if I think that's true, I think I become that thought. And I have no other basis, no other essence, nothing greater than the thinking I'm doing. Self-centered thoughts are single dimensional. They have one point and purpose, just like a lie, because it is a lie. And that is to reinforce that truth and reality is a product of thought. It's what I think of things that things are. That's why my expectations seem dashed, because when I have a thought and expect something, I think my thoughts are true and real. I think the only thing that can happen is that expectation. And when it doesn't, I think my life is at risk and other people are really screwing with me. Not so, just an imagined state. There is no perspective in something trying to make only a single point. Like a lie claims only to be true, it claims only to be what it can't be. It's trying only to make that point. It tries only defensively to maintain that image, that projection. Same with ego. Same with the self we talk about. Having only one point, having no perspective, other options don't seem possible. They seem impossible. They seem as thought not even to exist, seeming so unlikely that they don't even seem to exist. So what do? Keep doing the wrong thing over and over and over again. Alcoholic keeps drinking. Why does the drink need to seem, nobody seems to start drinking 12 quarts of tequila or 12 quarts of vodka. It seems as though the consumption gets greater in time because the effect is being treated to feel better about what's being done rather than the cause being recognized and admitted. It's actually being reinforced by the thing that claims to be saving the person. So it again reveals how a lie functions on the backward basis or the reverse basis. I'm treating the effect. What am I doing? Maintaining and reinforcing the cause. I'm thinking I'm going to get better by doing the thing that makes me feel better. But in fact, I'm really just getting better at thinking worse because I think I've got the thinking under control. So thinking of itself bears a self born of thought. When I think about my thinking, I'm thinking about thinking of itself. I'm using thinking to think of itself. And it bears this sense of self that immediately becomes, when I believe those thoughts are true and they're real and they're reliable enough to be dependable enough to be constantly used as my exclusive and sole source, I think who I am is reliant then on those thoughts. I become those thoughts. All I am is what I think. And I naturally start to wonder what everybody else is thinking about me. And I don't do that because I'm really concerned about what they're doing. I'm doing that because I have so much doubt and uncertainty naturally caused by knowing better that who I am is not who I think I am. Knowing that knowing is something that is a supreme form of awareness that I have. That knowing awareness helps alert me by its presence to the fact that I'm thinking something that's crazy. Fear is a natural outcome of making decisions that put my life at risk. And when the fear is self-induced, the instinctive nature of fear, which generally is designed to help us thrive and survive, is actually reversed and helps begin to kill us through compulsive and impulsive and reactive behaviors. Because it's backward. It's like we're wearing our brain backward and wondering, it's like driving a car backward and wondering why it's hard to get anywhere. Can be done, but first of all, it's probably illegal because it would be so dangerous. And secondly, it'd be unlikely to ever get us anywhere because the potential for catastrophe is great. They used to say, put the cart before the horse. Today it's cars. Self-centered thoughts, a self-centered in thought, self-centeredness is a self-centered in thought. It's all it's centered in is what we're thinking about it, nothing else. It has no basis, just like a lie. Exactly like a lie, exactly like ego, exactly like addiction. The idea that there's no other choice is simply a thought. And it's a desperate thought trying to make the single point that all I am is what I think. It's not true. That's why it's desperate. It's desperately trying to escape the greater knowing that we have. We would not feel wrong if we didn't know what was right, ever. So we don't think we have perspective within the thinking because the thinking serves itself. It continues to replicate and replicate and replicate, demanding that we only think about things more and more and more and more to try to secure the self that we think we are, while in fact we're putting our existence at risk. So our conversation is designed to help begin to notice that we're aware something is wrong. since we naturally know what is right. And mental illness, and I don't talk about this as a scientific doctorate diagnosis, but illness, meaning not well, not easy, diseased, is simply the thought we only have one choice. And that choice is all we can do, because it's the only thing that we can do, even while it's a repetition of what causes the problem. And it will always fail to achieve a solution. And yet it will look like the solution. So in addiction, the solution becomes the problem and the problem becomes the solution. Because it's backward. That's what insanity is. It sees things that aren't there. Well, if I'm seeing things that aren't there and think they're real, that would mean I'm not seeing anything real and wondering why things aren't going too well. Temporary relief is not a solution, since within the context of obsessive thinking, it gives us hope we're on the right track. Well, we're only learning how to deny the problem has no track other than our constant obsessive focus. And all the fractured states of mind we develop to think we're on a new track. Think of all the diagnoses, anxious disorders that are being diagnosed. They're continuing to refine the list of things that are fractured from this line of thinking that begin to develop. If I'm paying attention to what isn't happening obsessively, how much attention could I have to pay to what is happening right now? I would say not a lot. I would say that's attention deficit disorder, pretty common. I certainly suffered and struggled with that when I was a kid. I called it boredom. Now I realize that it's just my attempt to desensitize myself and ignore what's going on. And denial is effectively a chance to pretend we're numb. And as sentient beings, desensitized to our capacity, that we don't have the capacity we have so we can support the ideas we have about the things we do. And boredom would be one of them. Generally, boredom used to be everything going on around me. And I began to realize what I was bored with was the same thinking about what was happening. I felt bored to death, literally, just like addiction is a death wish. So our conversation is just a chance to start to see how we even struggle in the context of talking about this openly in a group. And it becomes a little more obvious when we're in a group, because if the essence of self-consciousness is defined as an undue regard for appearance, interesting that a self that's conscious, you would think would be, if I could create a self with conscious, that would be a pretty spectacular thing to be able to do. And yet the definition of it is that it's an undue regard for appearance. Why? Because it's an image, it's a projection. I'm not who that is. I'm projecting that as who that is. And I'm worried about what other people may see because they may see what I'm unwilling to admit. So delusion will always be fantasy thought to be real. Illusion thought to be real. There's nothing wrong with illusion, nothing wrong with fantasy, nothing wrong with creativity, innovation. It's actually one of our highest mental capacities to imagine things. But when we think they become real immediately, it seems like they're a curse. It seems like we're condemned. It seems like we have no other choice but to continue to do the wrong thing and feel bad about it. So we've actually used this against ourselves and actually killed suicides at an all-time high, overdoses at an all-time high, addictions at an all-time high, manic homicides of people randomly shot because somebody doesn't get invited to a party, all-time high. That's one of the recent excuses, apparently, in California anyhow. This isn't an odd confluence. It's an accurate consequence to an absolute social ignorance, meaning ignoring a problem honestly and accurately. So here's some things to consider in advance of our conversation. And just, any day, if you can feel better about the thing that you're doing that's worse, it's a good example of how flexible thinking is. And it's not just the flexibility in the thinking you're doing, it's flexibility in being able to actually see that the thinking we don't think we're doing, this thing that we call the subconscious that seems to haunt us and seems to be dark and seems to be hidden and all that. And it's not hidden or dark at all, because it's expressed in everything that we're thinking and all the reactiveness and impulsiveness and compulsiveness that we act out on. That's all those things. Actually, we're giving credit to them, but we don't want to admit that we're doing what we're doing. So why would we admit that these are the things that we're actually responding to or reacting to? Of course, we want to deny them. So addictions, if we can notice, for instance, in meditation, that there's a peaceful nature, that's our nature, because it's not changing. The difference in this infinite concept and this principled concept and this absolute concept is that principles do not change. Absolute does not change. Infinite does not change. Unlimited does not change. It just is as it is. It is as it has always been, and there really is no history because it's always present. It's always within reach. It's always available. It is always our birthright. Literally, it is our essence. It is not a choice. It is simply a possibility of possibilities for us to function within the generosity of something that has given itself to us in undiluted form, indivisible form, inviolable form, immutable form, and not even be a form. Even the words I use can't comprehend this. But I can start aiming at something that I know if you know, because if it's indivisible, you must know. And if you know, and I speak to it at all, you may start noticing you know. And I would suggest to you all the things you've been doing that are wrong, that you felt were wrong, is clear evidence that you know, because you would never have thought of those things as wrong if you didn't have a clear guidance system for what's right. You would never feel wrong, bad, disillusioned, less than, low self-worth, etc. Wouldn't happen. So addiction is a reliance on trying to stop a symptom or the effect as though it is happening to us. Convenient that we would say it's happening to us when every symptom, every effect always is a reflection of a cause. No effect starts first. They're always caused. Cause and effect starts with the cause. Recovery is responsibility and accountability for the cause of the effect. Recovery is starting to admit, oh, I'm causing this. The I in the choices I make is causing this, whether it be in thinking or in knowing. I am causing it by doing what I'm doing to have those effects. Start to notice the effects are actually my responsibility. I'm not irresponsible. If there's a responsible infinite source for life, which would be called life, then we are each responsible, being of it. Absolutely responsible, not negotiable, not something that comes and goes. Not something that stops at the agreements I've made with the banks that I owe money to, or the people I'm in relationships to, marriage, whatever it is. Doesn't stop because it doesn't begin, or it's always beginning. It's always new. It's like the moment, the present moment. It's always beginning. What does that mean? Everything that can be done can always be done in the moment. Always. Always, 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 always. Now. Here. Hear ye. It is easy to think we don't know what we're doing in thought, because it's easy to think we don't know what we're doing. And it's no accident that twisted thinking reverses effects to be seen as the cause. That we want to escape, rather than notice they're offering perspective that our choice caused it. So we can actually look at the thought and say, oh, if I'm the cause, I don't even have to think of what the thought is, by the way. If I simply admit in the simplest fashion what I am doing now is responsible for what is happening now, I relieve my thoughts enormously. It's like I let the reins of the horse go and let it go back to the barn where it would like to rest and eat. If it had its own choice, its own druthers, I think is a cowboy term. Feeling wrong, bad, less than, low self-esteem, worthless, self-loathing, self-hatred are all accurate measurements and assessments of thoughts that we have determined represent us, who we are. If that's all I am is what I think, certainly that is a lot less than and less esteemable than and worth less than an absolute knowing source. And if I'm self-loathing and self-hating, think of it. I know that that self I'm posing as who I think I am is loathsome and filled with fear and hate for the thing I'm doing. I am both guilty and ashamed for. Those aren't coincidences until coincidence is seen as coincidence. They're happening simultaneously. Effects are immediate to cause. And yet, if I sit still and am perfectly at peace and doing what I can to think less, I am causing less. It isn't to suggest that not thinking is the goal here, but simply starting to see that the misutilization of thought causes problems that we would like to think are being happening to us, so we can avoid the culpability for actually noticing something that can. I mean, for me, I got nauseous when I started noticing this. I started noticing that I had a very, very sick body that was under enormous stress. My stomach was nauseous. I felt like throwing up. And as a matter of fact, I did throw up. I threw a big gob of acidic mucus up in my stomach, from my stomach. And I realized that that had developed in my stomach as something as a manifestation of the acidic, toxic thoughts that I was maintaining. The stress I created was causing the consequence of that through all the bodily chemistry that starts to misfire under the weight of anxiety and stress. But once I threw that up, I didn't feel the intensity of that nausea anymore. Now I feel it more subtly when I am up to something that I don't think I'm doing. I can feel it and sense it, and recognize it's my guidance system. It's it's the GPS monitor saying when you miss the turn, it says, go to the next light, make a left. It doesn't berate you. The woman's voice, the man's voice, whoever it is that's talking in the GPS doesn't start arguing with you and yelling. It just simply says, go to the next lights, go past the next lights, make a left turn, make a right turn. Continue to the course, I think it says. Return to the course, something like that, reminding me, oh, you got off course, go back. So what is that for us in human terms? It's starting to notice that when I'm wrong and think I'm right, I have no obligation right now to continue thinking that. None whatsoever. None. Zero. Zip. Nada. Empty set. Null. Void. Nothing compels me other than my continued reliance on the thinking that's thinking about the self I'm thinking becomes the self I think I am. Isn't true. Thoughts are thoughts. They're assessments and best estimates. They're imagined images, reflections of awareness. If I'm aware of things, I'm determining things about those things. I'm coming to conclusions about them. I want to make decisions about them. If there's a car coming and it's moving fast enough, I want to decide whether or not it's time to start running. If I'm hungry, I want to decide, what am I going to eat? I want to do the right thing. But once I start imagining who I am as what I think, the wrong thing is almost inevitable, because I'm asking for the perspective I'm not willing to proactively offer my own experience. Thoughts are products of truth and reality. They are not the creator of truth or reality. To think thoughts is true is to rely only on more and more thinking, rather than knowing that knows. And obsessive thinking is this constant chronic reliance, thinking it's dependable, and the only thing dependable about it is that it's undependable, except that it's always going to lead to doom and failure. That's dependable. If we want certainty, become certain about that. And you'll notice as you become certain about that, it will make a lot less sense to continue to do that thing, whatever it is. When it comes to thinking, it just starts to give a little bit of breath between the thoughts. And the question is, it isn't trying to stop them that's the goal. It's start noticing it's where they're starting that's the problem. The impulse to constantly redo, repeat. It's like just keeping your clothes in the washer over and over, never taking them out. What is the point of having them clean? It's useless. Thoughts are products, I'm going to repeat, of truth and reality. We are products of truth and reality. The universe is a product of truth and reality. Life is an absolute state of being. It is not a body. It's not a form. We're in life forms. We're experiencing life through life forms. And all matter is a form. And thoughts are formed. They aren't truth and reality. Bodies disintegrate, but what do? They return all the essential elements of the body to exactly what they were before the body formed. So that's ultimately transformation. For us, death is in fact transformation. We talk about trying to transform things during life. That's a pretty major transformation. But it doesn't mean our essence, our being essence, is affected at all. And if you listen, we've talked about it in the last few months about the near-death experiences. Does it really take being near death to finally admit that we have an awareness that's much greater than what we think, and especially greater than who we think we are? And the great, beautiful irony is that all the people that have these near-death experiences, almost to, I think all of them, but there's always potential exceptions, are all very hesitant to return to their body once they are in the face of that absolute state of being. And wouldn't that be a pretty good admission of how committed to the illness we think is natural to humankind, when in fact it has never been natural, it's never been healthy, it's never been logical, it's never been rational. It's always been insane. This conversation is a new conversation because it's happening now. But we have newly minted through history the replication of this thinking. Thinking will get better than it. We haven't yet gotten there, have we? To be constantly questioning, looking, seeking, and never seem to be finding. This thing we're talking about can't be lost or found because it's always ever presently exactly where we are. And we've actually been operating on it while we thought we weren't, because we were so reliant on thinking that when things went really well, we thought it was our thinking that was coming through finally, rather than having moments of clarity where we actually just begin to operate within the abundance of nature rather than the scarcity of thought that would manifest naturally scarce consequences. And we've thought, my thinking's finally done it. I'm better off. And then a moment later, a week later, start thinking, what the hell happened? That thing went away. It's not happening anymore. It's not as great as I thought. My thinking, once again, is relying on my thinking rather than the glimpse I got of that absolute state that I was willing to finally concede because circumstance finally was justifiable enough to say this is ridiculous and insane in some way. These near-death experiences do not mean we need to be near death. And I would suggest we're always near death because we don't know when it's coming. But if we were actually accurate about our experience, we would be noticing the absolute state, invigorating, inspired state of adventure that we are in the face of. And it includes the potential to die, not as something to avoid, but as seeing it as something that simply is a transformation of our whole experience. To think thoughts are true is to rely on more and more thinking. So when things go well and we actually express that infinite state that was naturally ours and that knowing, and we're constantly chronically thinking it's thinking that's responsible, we just get better at thinking more. Thinking's our solution. And that's obsessive thinking. It's sick. It's a fantasy. Thoughts are designed to express reality and truth. They're not designed to create and conclude reality and truth. Why? It's kind of like where we are. If we think we need to get somewhere, we're thinking we're not where we are. If the place we've always ever been is where we are, there is no place to get, ever, anywhere. Why? Because we've always been there, not because we can't get there, but because we've always been there. The same with thinking. It isn't because thinking can't express reality and truth. It can't conclude reality and truth because reality and truth is absolutely where we always are. And it isn't incomplete. It isn't scarce. It isn't violable. It isn't divisible. It isn't inequitable. It isn't discriminatory. It's indiscriminate. It's given to all. And it isn't even given. It is actually it's an essence that has created the opportunity for all of these things to even be possible. All of the seeming living that we do, this expression of life that we're witnessing. It's almost like our life forms are metaphors for life. They're just expressions of what's possible within the realm of life. And if we are thinking thoughts are the creator of truth and reality, we are thinking impossibility is the nature of our existence. And so more and more impossibility occurs. And if you're looking at the world honestly right now, you will see a lot of attempts at impossibility and all the devastating consequences of those attempts pretty clearly. So trying to feel better about what is disturbing is, I would suggest, psychotic. And starting to notice that what's disturbing is disturbing to us, and we're aware of it, and it hurts. And there are parts of us that have been wearing that weight while we haven't been thinking we're wearing that weight because of the preoccupation we've had by trying to constantly feel better about what we're doing that's wrong. Any presumed scarcity is in thought, not reality or truth. You cannot have scarcity in what is so abundant that even abundance can't define it. And ultimately, I grew up in the Christian Science Church, and ultimately, and I'm not here as an adherent of any religion or any predisposed organization or any of that, but I have availed myself of many, many different forms of religion, and my sense is they're all aiming at the same thing. They're not all expressing it in the same way, but they're all aiming at the exact same essence. But on the church, when I was a kid, it said God is love. And I used to think, well, that's interesting. Most of these people don't seem to recognize that. I got into a lot of trouble for asking questions, not sitting upright, tipping back in my chair, all the kinds of things that, 7 and 8-year-old and 9-year-old boys do. But I was somewhat surprised to see the enormity of the effect it had on people. So I didn't stop it. I was defiant. I wanted to make my point. I learned to get better at being antagonistic and troubling and express the trouble I felt inside outside. Nobody can determine for you what you are doing with your thoughts. And there are no combination of words great enough to permeate and penetrate your mental resistance to those thoughts. None. So there's nothing I can say that's going to help you. Nothing that can be said that will help you until your interest in actual help, rather than helping yourself to more ideas that seem like help that aren't helping, that are basically just helping you get better at being worse or thinking worse. There are no combination of words great enough to penetrate your mental resistance. Why? We're free to think what we want. Free will allows us to think whatever we want. And when that freedom seems to condemn us, we are misutilizing thought. And you don't need to be open to any of this. You can think you got it all figured out and nothing's going to ever hurt you and harm you. You're welcome to. But I will guarantee you that the wearing of any weight you create and the resistance to what's happening that you promote will create a persistence of doubt in you that will seem to be something impossible to overcome, while in fact you're admitting the impossibility of overcoming something you're committed to continuing to maintain. It is no more and no further from your own thoughts that those things occur, as it is for mine. So we share equally, both in the bounty of this absolute source, but also in the consequence of the wrong thinking we do. And my suspicion is, my expectation is, if I have one that is accurate, my assessment is that if we share the same thing in common, we are doing the same thing that's wrong, and just put different faces, places, times attached to it. We put different masks on it to make it look as though it's distinct to us, so we can continue to justify the thinking about it that we do in our seemingly private world. And yet we share ourselves at a diminished capacity that people obviously recognize, because we don't tend to get things done well. We don't tend to interact with people well. We don't tend to deal with our responsibilities very well. All those things become failings naturally. And even those of us who do those things very, very well still notice there's a depreciated value compared to the absolute abundant value that would be created in an intuitive expression of knowing that is well beyond reason, well beyond thinking, well beyond understanding. Has a capacity to achieve things that are universal in a matter of a breath. If we can use addiction and other means to kill a self of our own making and not notice it's not actually who we are, it's insanity that we're struggling with. None of us are unique enough in ways that are not similar, if not identical, to each other. So the beauty of other people that can seem so annoying is that what I'm annoyed by when I see that in them is what I'm thinking about, not what they're doing. And starting to see that has helped me start to notice the benefit people give me, just like the benefit the effects give me in my own experience, and start to say thanks rather than fuck you, I don't want to see you again, you're toxic, I can't be near you, I got to get away from you. And I say that to some people too. There are certain limits I just don't seem ready to want to deal with, so I tend to isolate myself from anybody who might trigger them, because I'm not ready to be infinitely large enough to actually admit them, concede them. So there's a blindness still in my experience. I don't talk about these things because I don't do them. I talk about them because I want to get better at talking about them and experiencing them without the idea that I am left alone to do that. The more I do alone, the better off I am, when in fact I'm just ruminating on thoughts that I'm reinforcing that have no contest, because there's no opposition to them. There's no perspective from them. They just seem to have their own internal guidance system that focusing on alone seems to give me some sense of security, while in fact it's creating all the insecurity and all the symptoms that I claim to not want to feel and think. Why? Because it's you lying. Doesn't make me a liar. It makes the thoughts I'm having lies. And if I'm choosing those things freely, which I would suggest we all do, it's sick to do that. While we're each free to think what we want, even when it threatens our existence and everyone else's. It's interesting that we would make that choice consistently. And I would say humans have done that pretty much throughout human history. And we have still survived and grown to be more people on the planet than have ever been here before. And that could just be that because sex is kind of orgasmic, it just is sort of a natural lead in that direction. But nevertheless, we seem to have enough for all those people, even though many are starving, many are hungry, many are living in conditions with they don't even have clean water. On our planet today, in modern history, today, these things are happening. I would say if we are the species we claim to be, those things would not be happening if we were living up to our capacity and actually expressing it voluntarily. Because nothing we choose to do is anything other than a voluntary choice. There's a lot going on in our brain that we don't think about at all or have to think about. But when our body hurts, we start thinking about it. And in the meantime, don't bother to think of it at all, because the brain knows exactly what to do because it's part of nature. It does what it does as well as it can, given what it has. And given the stress we impose on the body, it doesn't do it as well as it normally would, because the body is undermined in every respect by stress and anxiety. In every way. every aspect of our bodily systems, all of them, beautifully designed, better computers in our brains than anything on earth yet. And we undermine it by our own maintenance of this stress that we chronically are committed to in the addictive thinking we do about thinking being our only source or only dependable reliance. And so we just keep turning to it, and repeating the same thing, thinking someday, somehow, if I just do more of this, it'll get better. It's exactly what describes an addict or an alcoholic or any kind of addiction. More is never enough. Why is it never enough? It ain't approaching the problem. It's doing everything it can to try to escape it, the symptom. So we are not and cannot be alone. We can think we're alone, since thoughts that are not true, thought to be true, lack any substance or connection to reality. What we're feeling when we're alone is the lack of substance in thoughts. And when I think who I am is what I think when my thoughts are lonely, having no substance, I become lonely. Again, not true. But to maintain that thought is to maintain the underlying insanity of the thoughts I'm maintaining, rather than start to see, oh, this information I'm getting is actually accurate to the thinking I'm doing, rather than the being I am that we are collectively. Feeling lonely is a function of thought, not reality. We are intimately interconnected, each and every one of us. Interconnected, woven into the absolute nature of existence and nature. Everything we do and think impacts everything that there is, everywhere anything is happening, because everything right now in the present that is happening, that exists, is happening where we are and everywhere else too, simultaneously. So anything I do interacts with all of that, and the function of change is, in fact, that thing. I am participating in the change. If you think you want to make a change in the world, I guarantee you, you have been since you got here. Ask your parents. Ask whoever took care of you. Ask your siblings. We're always making change. The problem is we're not making the change we know we could be making because of the dysfunctional nature of insanity and addiction. And addiction is insanity. And addiction is a lie, because it's the maintenance of the idea. It's the only thing we can do. And when it comes to thinking, that's where all those other compulsions come from that have that same line of thinking. More is always better. It's not the drink we have. It's the next drink we're thinking about. It's not the line of Coke we have. It's the next line that we're worried about. What happens when I run out? Well, when I run out, I can't start. So I obviously don't have the problem yet. It's the obsessive thinking that drives me back to starting over again, finding the stuff, starting to do the wrong thing because I really believe it's a solution. And no matter all the evidence that I have pretended to be blind to, because I've so microscopically focused on the one point I'm trying to make, and that is that all I am is what I think. And I've lost perspective because I'm looking into a funnel and I'm as deep as I possibly can and think there's nothing else to see, when in fact what I'm seeing is an accurate assessment of the narrow view I've taken, the focus that I've given to my own thinking being everything at the expense of not noticing that everything else is just beyond the limits of that defined point. Everything else. The horizon never kept the rest of the world from happening. And when it was thought to be the edge of doom, it was the edge of doom of the limited thoughts people were witnessing. Because nature knows naturally what nature is. It's not a surprise to nature that it's a part of nature. It's simply a surprise to the thinking we're doing that we have to understand nature before we can experience nature, when in fact our experience is based on nature to begin with. The thing we do to try to get there is the thing we're doing to try to deny we are there. Our body language speaks to us in a language that is perfectly clear, perfectly clear. And even our body now becomes an asset rather than a liability to the thinking, just like thinking is an asset rather than a liability when it's seen clearly. It's actually been telling us all along. It even knows what's wrong. It knows that it's being asked to do something it can't do, but it's there at our disposal. Thinking is there for us to use however we want. It doesn't argue with us. It doesn't have an attitude. It doesn't fight back. It just naturally reveals the resistance we're creating in trying to oppose reality and truth and think that that's even possible. It has no impact on reality and truth, our opposition, none. It only impacts our experience. Obsessive thoughts don't hear what's said. They hear what they think is being said. And what do they think is being said? Whatever serves the thoughts they're having. So like I said earlier, when people say you're not listening to me, they're right. They're actually giving you good guidance. You're not listening to what they're saying. They're listening to what you think they're saying. And listen, they may be saying something, because I often experience this, that is completely useless to even listen to. Because we've been talking about so much shit for so long that we actually think getting our shit together is a goal in life. And that we're kind of shuffling our feet, talking about all the shit we've got to do today as though we are condemned to it rather than seeing it as a choice. If it's shit, it's a waste product. It's not something that's necessary. It's something the body knows to get rid of. And I would suggest also that our stress causes constipation, causes an inability of a body to get rid of what eventually turns to a toxic nature inside. Sepsis and all kinds of other bacterial forms of bodily disease are encouraged by the inability to simply get rid of what the body is designed to get rid of. And tension, because it creates inflammation, begins to restrict the ability of our body to even function in the most basic ways. It's not an accident. It's not a curse. It's an absolute coincidence, simultaneous manifestation of the tension we create by making believe our thinking is true and real, and that who we are is what we think. Nothing could be more central to our emotional well-being and our physical well-being than to make believe that who we are is bent on trying to replace truth and reality. There could be nothing more stressful than making believe that the entirety of existence depends on us thinking about it, rather than start to see that our thinking is actually a product of it, which is pretty magnificent. And it certainly isn't designed to destroy us physically. It's designed to use our physicality in any way that can be useful and helpful and beneficial to everyone else. Because when I'm better, everyone's better. And when I'm worse, everyone is worse. And to start thinking honestly about our experiences, start to notice things that we didn't think were even possible to notice, because the knowing nature is not in doubt. It isn't questionable. It isn't uncertain. It isn't unstable. It isn't unnatural. And it's not unhealthy. It is our nature. It is our absolute nature that we have not expressed very well, because we have somehow needed the pain we've created and the circumstances that we're witnessing to get to a point to ask ourselves, what is going on here? This is crazy. I'm hearing it from people more than I ever have. And I suspect we may be at a point in human history where we're willing to start looking collectively and see the impact of our collective nature is in fact the impact that we've been bemoaning, and that we have seemed to see so clearly what's wrong with everything and everyone else, and not notice that it's our own doubt that we're struggling with that is the central cause of all those things we see so clearly out there. The impact we're making is a manifestation of exactly what we're all collectively thinking. It's not a mistake in terms of the consequence, in terms of the effect. It's an absolute accurate reflection of the culmination of all that we're thinking. And our present nature is the culmination of everything that's ever been thought and everything that's ever happened. Right now, the earth, the universe is a culmination of everything that has ever happened. There isn't a past, because the past is in the present. Everything that's ever happened is, in fact, the present. It's all here now. It's always all here, been here now. There is no other place. There is no place to be other than where we are. And to think, I can talk to people about this and they say, yeah, but then my thinking starts and Say, okay, so you're thinking in the present that you're not in the present. Yeah, well, that's the problem. I said, yeah, because you take it seriously. You think that thinking is true. And you think what you need to do is keep thinking about that thinking, and someday it'll get better. And in fact, it gives you a greater and greater impression that you're not where you are. And then immediately think you need to be somewhere else with someone else and more or less of something else. When we think the goal is to be somewhere else, we are thinking we're not where we are because there is nothing else. What else could we possibly want if we actually saw that clearly in thinking? There is nothing else. So again, like scarcity is only in thought, lies are only in thought, ego is only in thought, addiction is only in thought. So too is this idea of getting somewhere else to satisfy us, and the idea that we're not where we are is only in thought. We're always where we are. We're always present. There is no other essence. There is no other place life is. There is no other place. You're literally dealing in an element of a dimension that isn't in time and space, because all the physicists who have defined the dimensions as distinct and separate probably know, I don't know enough physicists to know, but probably know that all of those dimensions must be acting simultaneously to everything that's happening. Not just the understanding we have about the dimensions we create and segregate, they must not be segregated whatsoever in actual life rather than the life we think we're in. They must be simultaneously happening together. We're the ones that created the clock. We created time. We created the idea of time. We create the ideas of scarcity in our thinking. The world has always given us everything it's ever had. From the beginning, it's all been here. Everything we've ever utilized in any way that we have transformed something, all we have done is taken matter that existed and make it into something else that it wasn't. That's it. So we're not the creators of it. We're actually the manipulators of it, the transformers of it. So maybe that's enough. It's about an hour. I want you all to know that I love talking about this because I have been heartbroken most of my life by keeping quiet and thinking that someday I'd sort it out and be able to actually expose myself as something that was sufficient enough to be wanted by all, rather than recognize that I'm already wanted by and part of it all, as we are all wanted by each other, because we are part of that whole that can't be divisible. We're all part of the same thing. It's like thinking my arm and my body are separate from me. To think that you out there are separate in any way from anything and anyone is to underutilize the exact same thing we were given in the freedom we have to contemplate what we're actually thinking. To turn that into a death wish, it's probably not the right direction it was designed for. At least it's not the most expansive direction. What's interesting, the wrong direction, like contraction, eventually gets to a point it can't contract anymore. And yet in the other direction, when it's right, it can be applied in every way, in every instance, forever. And I don't suspect there even is a forever. If there's an absolute presence, forever is here, because forever never comes. And that's a bit of a torture test to think someday we'll get there where we can't get. And again, I would suggest what is everlasting is ever present. So forever isn't ever out there. It is forever now. To be for it is to be just like forgiving. It's about being forgiving. What am I giving? What I have. What do I have? Everything. What do I have to lose when I give it all away? Nothing. I actually get the experience of keeping it, just as the paradoxes in AA talk about. We give it away to keep it. We die to live. We surrender to win. Those are all based on this absolute concept. Love you all.